Explosions shake Moscow streets as drones spread chaos across Russia's capital. We'll talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, Moscow was unexpectedly attacked by drones. Russian authorities traditionally reassured the public that everything had been shut down. Russian media published numerous photos and videos from the capital. Loud explosions were reported and plumes of smoke were rising in parts of the city. Panic spread among Moscow residents through local chat groups. How might repeated drone attacks in Moscow influence Russian domestic policy or leadership decisions?
Well, it's not a coincidence. It's not something out of, let's say, Kremlin strategy to call this just a normal situation, the situation that is under control. They're doing their best to reassure Russians that nothing too serious is going on, and this was just a small breach that happened just once, and it will not be repeated again. And it all started in 2022 when Russian government insisted on calling war in Ukraine a special military operation. And it's actually criminally illegal to call a war. Everyone was supposed to call it a special military operation exactly because the Kremlin wanted to stress that it is happening somewhere very, very far away, that it is happening on the territory of a different country, that it is it will not touch any Russians in any serious way. And of course, we understand the situation is absolutely different. And actually, we must say that the war started in 2014, while Russia, of course, pretended that these were not Russian forces attacking Ukraine in 2014, but those were some local militias, local forces, local armies that wanted to become independent and eventually become part of Russia. And again, in Russian constitution and that redrawn Putin's constitution, we see those parts of Ukraine being included into Russian territory according to those texts of absolutely illegal, if we look from the international law standpoint, constitution. So as of now, the Kremlin is saying that nothing serious is happening, and they're trying to stress it any and all ways they can. And we've been seeing for past month, at least past month, or actually even more, the shortage of gasoline on separate different stations on the Russian territory and on occupied Ukrainian territories also, if we talk about Crimea, first of all, and some other shortages, for example, lack of power and or electricity being turned off in the evenings in separate different cities of Russia. And this actually brings war to home. It brings war and it gives the understanding that it's not just merely a special military operation happening somewhere, but it is an actual war that Russia is waging in Ukraine, and those echoes of that war will come to Russia. So right now, as of now, of course, from the official sources, and that's the only sources that Russian media has, of course, the official sources are saying that it's just a small breach. It will not be repeated. It's business as usual, if we can put it this way. And they try to calm everyone down and let Russians know that nothing too serious is going on. Although we understand that the repeated attacks on military infrastructure, the repeated attacks by Ukraine is working. That strategy of repeated attacks is working. And the more of those attacks are happening, the more of the understanding we see among Russian people. So this might bring Russia closer to some form of negotiation, although it will definitely take time because right now the Kremlin and Russian government is trying to do all they can again to reassure the people that actually less and less believe what they're hearing from the Kremlin and rather believe in what they're seeing with their own eyes, and also what they are seeing in those on those gas stations, with the lines to the gas stations, and attacks. So it's, of course, not a coincidence that the Kremlin is trying to downplay what is happening. But of course, thankfully, there are some ways of communication for Russians to really understand that this is not merely a special military operation somewhere far away on other countries' territory, but war is coming close to home.
I agree that Russia is finally facing the consequences of its own aggression. What it unleashed on others is now returning home. What's your reaction to this unfolding situation? Dear guys, dear audience, share your thoughts, reactions and emotions in the comments below. Alexandra, Trump arrives in Japan. Later this week, US President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will meet in South Korea. Main question, how could this meeting affect the world, and will it help bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war? What's on the agenda? How likely is it that Trump and Xi will agree to put pressure on Russia, on Russian dictator Vladimir Putin?
As of now, we understand that the main point for President Trump is the trade agreement with China. Of course, the trade agreement, that's what President Trump is seeking. Not during the meeting, he's seeking the signature, the signing of that treaty with Xi Jinping. But it's still not fully 100%, let's say, a decision that is going to be made, or a treaty that is going to be signed. We still don't know if anything is going to be signed during that Thursday's meeting that is highly anticipated by the American side. But if we look at the Chinese media and at the Chinese side, we realize and we see that the Chinese are not too optimistic regarding that Thursday's meeting. Of course, they want to see that meeting happen, but if we judge by what we're seeing in Chinese media and their sources, their different sources that are quoting unnamed representatives of the administration, they are not too optimistic. We're not seeing any breakthrough, let's put it this way. So for President Trump, it's extremely important, first of all, to sign the trade agreement. If the trade agreement is going to be signed, and it's in itself is going to be a miracle, then they can go to discussing different issues, including war in Europe, including Chinese support for Russia. And we understand that for China, it's a great opportunity right now, and China is gaining so much from what is happening, from Russia's war with Ukraine, because what China is getting cheap Russian resources. Russia cannot sell those resources to Europe anymore, at least not at that scale. So China is getting all the cheap resources, and they do not plan to stop. At least we're not seeing any plans of stopping getting cheap Russian resources. And also another thing, the Russian market, now European market is closed for Russia. It's closed for business with Russia. So China is the only market that Russia can buy anything from, starting from technology and machinery, ending with the different products of day-to-day life. So we understand that for China, it is a big market. And right now, China, not right now, but after 2022, when the European market closed down for Russia, China started selling everything Russia needed. And of course, it's a good gain for Chinese economy. So we understand that China is not interested in the war ending. China is not interested in Russia diversifying to Europe and European markets and starting buying something from European countries after the war stops. So we understand that President Trump then needs to offer something to his Chinese counterparts for China to be interested in not supporting Russia anymore. The other option are sanctions, of course, sanctions that are being discussed in the American Congress, although the shutdown is still going on and there is no end in sight. It seems that the shutdown can continue for some time. And even though the shutdown is in full force, still some committees of Congress, for example, Senate's Committee on Foreign Relations, is considering some sanctions on China due to China's support for Russian military machine. But we still don't know if those bills will go through, if they will go through the committee, if they will go through the Senate, then the House of Representatives, so full Congress, and if it's going to be signed by President Trump. So right now, we're not seeing that much of a pressure from the American side. We more see some probably ideas of cooperation from the American side. And of course, for President Trump, it would be extremely important to sign this trade deal. If it's going to be signed or not, it's still a big question. We leave a question mark here, but only after that signing, only after everything is settled between Washington and Beijing regarding trade, only after that we can see real pressure from the Trump administration, not from Congress, because Congress within itself, it's discussing those sanctions within itself, but we can see real pressure from the White House on China and real pressure from the White House on China supporting Russian military machine and supporting Russian economy. Because of course we understand that right now Russian economy is in shambles. Russian economy is having big problems. So without the Chinese support, it would be difficult to imagine how Russian economy could survive. So it's not a coincidence, again, not talking about coincidences today. It's not a coincidence that Kirill Dmitriev, the representative of the Kremlin, the representative of Putin, the husband of Putin's daughter's friend, was in New York and Miami. He met with Steve Witkoff and he met with the representatives of the Trump administration exactly because realizing that the sanctions will work against Rosneft and Lukoil. So he rushed to the United States to somehow clear the debris, to somehow maybe try to fix the damage done by the recent phone calls between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio, and after recent phone calls between Putin and Trump. So right now, Russia is actually, by sending Kirill Dmitriev so fast to the United States, is signaling that those sanctions will really hurt Russia. So without Chinese help, without China, it would be very difficult to imagine how Russia can get out of it. So they need China. Of course, Putin needs China, and he is trying to drag China into the negotiation, of course, at least into the negotiation on Russia's side, definitely. So before there is a trade agreement between Washington and Beijing, I don't think that we will see any real pressure on China regarding Russia. But after that, everything is possible. Everything is on the table. And we see how President Trump really wants to stop the war in Europe as fast as possible.
Alexandra, yes, President Donald Trump has also not ruled out the possibility of meeting North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un in the near future, according to his statement quoted by The Guardian. But what objectives could the United States realistically pursue in a potential meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un?
We've seen those meetings, and we've seen a meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump during Trump's first term. So for President Trump, it is a part of his, let's put it this way, presidential legacy. The fact that President Trump is ready to talk to anyone, is ready to talk to any bad guys, and keep the world safe. So President Trump sees it as a possibility to talk to North Korea and keep the world safe by having some kind of relationship with Kim Jong-un and with North Korea in general. So President Trump, for President Trump, it's more of a diplomatic and political opportunity for actually being presented inside the United States. So the Americans rather see it as a way to put the pressure off of South Korea, off of real American allies in the Asia-Pacific region. So by talking to Kim Jong-un, by having some kind of, not cooperation, but at least a dialogue with North Korea, President Trump and MAGA Republicans see this as an opportunity to keep them in check. Because what MAGA Trumpists are saying and MAGA Republicans are saying is that if the U.S. side doesn't know anything about what's happening in North Korea, it's difficult to understand when will they really have a weapon that can fly not just to South Korea, that in itself is extremely dangerous, of course, but fly all over to the United States. If there will be that moment, that pivotal moment, that something can be shot from the Pacific region, from Asia-Pacific region, they really want to know if it's China, if it's North Korea, if it's some rogue actors. And without that dialogue, without keeping North Korea in check somehow, there will be no opportunity to know who is actually behind some attacks on the American soil, if tragically something like that might happen. So the Americans rather see it as a positive thing for President Trump to communicate somehow with Kim Jong-un. And for President Trump, he sees that as part of his presidential legacy. Actually, not, of course, making North Korea an ally of the United States, definitely not, because the propaganda in North Korea is still portraying the United States only as evil, 100% evil, as a devilish country, definitely nothing less than a devilish country, but still on the diplomatic level, the Americans and State Department usually likes to repeat one mantra. They are saying that everyone is used to talking about North Korean special services, North Korean spies, North Korean, let's say those, yes, special agents, as some agents or some services that are not too up to technological advancements. They're not too technologically advanced in general. And the world likes to see them this way. But the State Department likes to repeat that actually we need to look at those special services of North Korea as most technologically advanced, as if you're sitting in a room with great minds of modern technology. And they believe, the State Department believes that North Korea, with all its economic troubles, with all its tragic situation for North Koreans on the ground, and the way that North Koreans live their lives is tragically, of course, but those special services are actually top-notch, according to the U.S. State Department, and they are actually extremely dangerous, according to the U.S. State Department, while North Korea likes to play in this game as if they are not technologically advanced, they don't know that much, and as if they are those silly guys that can be tricked by, for example, American Special Services. No. The State Department repeated many times that they should be treated really seriously. So from the American side, for President Trump, this is a good step to get more votes in the United States, or get better polls in the United States, because the Americans see it as a good opportunity to keep North Korea in check.
Alexandra, you mentioned Russian energy resources earlier, before the question about Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker stated that Washington expects concrete steps from Hungary toward giving up Russian energy resources, according to Fox News. The diplomat noted that the United States hopes for action not only from Budapest, but also from countries such as Slovakia and Turkey. These nations are expected to develop and implement plans to reduce their energy dependence on Moscow. What specific measures can Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey implement to meaningfully reduce their dependence on Russian energy in the short, medium, and long term?
Well, for short term or medium, maybe rather medium term, of course, they would need the help of their European partners. Of course, they would need the help of European countries that are not so eager helping, for example, Hungary, or helping other countries that are, let's say, sometimes not voting as one within the European Union. And the citizens of European countries are not eager helping Hungary, they're not too excited about this idea of their money, actually their taxes, used to help out Hungary get rid of those contracts with Russia. So in short term and medium term, this will require real unity within the European Union. And this might cost some votes or quite a few votes for many politicians, like, for example, in Germany. German voters are divided within themselves whether to continue buying Russian resources, and that's Alternative for Germany, that party that is quite popular in the eastern parts of Germany, or to get rid of any connections with Russia whatsoever. And that's more of the western part of Germany, of course. So some countries are divided within themselves. Should they or should not they be buying Russian resources, let alone the fact that they would need to help countries like Hungary not buying Russian resources. So it requires real political will and real readiness to lose some votes potentially by some politicians in European countries. But long term, if we talk about long term, this makes things a little easier, because long term, of course, we cannot ignore the situation that is unfolding right now in the Caribbean. We cannot ignore what is happening with Venezuela. And if we talk about Venezuela, if we think about Venezuela, Venezuela is the richest in resources. It has more oil than Saudi Arabia. Venezuela has more gold than all African countries combined. So Venezuela is extremely rich in resources. And right now, as of now, 90% of Venezuelan oil, and we must say, yes, it's heavy oil, it's difficult to produce, but the infrastructure is in shambles because of horrendous and horrific Maduro regime. And actually, the tragedy of Venezuelan people is unfolding in front of our eyes. The country is so rich and the people are so poor. So we understand that long term, European Union, European countries, including Hungary, can be buying from Venezuela and can be getting Venezuelan oil and Venezuelan resources, or at least parts of those resources, and it might be even cheaper, although the geography seems weird, but it might be even cheaper than from the Persian Gulf countries. So we understand that there is this opportunity. There is this opportunity in the Caribbean. We don't know how things will unfold, but long term, if we talk about long term, the European Union in general and different separate countries can be buying oil and can be buying different resources from that Caribbean country. But as of now, if we talk about short term, if we talk about what countries can do right now, today, it will require support from other European countries that have difficulties themselves. And of course, we're seeing how Spain is commenting on not buying Russian resources, how Portugal is dubious about those issues. The countries that are further away from Russian border are a bit more vague about not buying Russian resources. So right now, there is this lack of European unity, and this lack of unity, not only if we talk about Turkey, if we comment on what Matthew Whitaker said, he was talking about NATO countries. Turkey, of course, is a NATO country. And for Turkey, it would be self-evident to buy from Azerbaijan, for example. But again, coming from Azerbaijan, who can be sure that it's not Russian resources? It requires some additional checks. It requires some additional information. So we understand the situation is really difficult. It's really complex. But if we talk about only European countries, if we let Turkey alone and leave Turkey alone, and if we talk about only European countries, that would require European unity among Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. That's more difficult, or northern countries that right now see the impact of Russian actually war that Russia is basically waging, or tests, as everyone likes to say, that Russia is testing the European Union countries, or at least a hybrid war that Russia is waging. So those northern countries are probably more ready to support some countries within the European Union that are still buying Russian resources, but it will also definitely require unity amongst those countries that are fighting their own battle within themselves.
Alexandra, a big thank to every nation that's turning away from Russian energy. Every step away from Moscow's oil and gas is a step toward freedom, and it's true. Speaking to journalists on Air Force One during a trip to Asia, yes, President Donald Trump commented on remarks that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin made about the test of the Burevestnik missile, which Putin said has an unlimited range. In response to Putin's boasting about the missile, Trump said that the United States has nuclear submarines positioned near Russia. About this, what do you think about these public exchanges as psychological warfare tools rather than strictly military signaling or something else?
Well, first of all, Putin is doing one thing. He is trying to drag Donald Trump into a negotiation in vacuum, because there are two things that can be discussed in vacuum, let's put it this way, or discussed disregarding Russia's war in Ukraine. These two things are strategic nuclear weapons and space. And we see that, of course, spatial programs are being discussed between Moscow and Washington, and the representatives of Roscosmos meet with NASA representatives regularly on a regular basis, and this work is continuing. So this work is continuing, disregarding Russia's war in Ukraine, disregarding killing Ukrainians, disregarding bombing Ukrainian cities. The same, and we must understand that, the same goes for nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons can be discussed disregarding anything else, because those weapons are on a different level. And of course, the mutual destruction, the guaranteed mutual destruction is what nuclear weapons have, let's say, behind them all. And we understand that START treaty that was signed by Dmitry Medvedev and Barack Obama comes to an end in February 2026. And that new START treaty, it's already a new START, or it's a treaty that cannot be renewed automatically. So they need to discuss it. They need to sign a new treaty for that. And Putin is doing everything to drag to drag Trump into a negotiation. We don't know. There is no independent analysis regarding those Russian weapons, regarding that Burevestnik weapon that Russia has been testing many times, and the tests were failed. And one good test doesn't mean that it will work. Let's remember that there were tests that killed the people that were testing the weapon, so it fell down on them, and it didn't carry nuclear weapons then. Of course, obviously it was just a test, but still there were far more negative testing than positive testing. So right now there is no independent analysis on how actually dangerous Burevestnik is. And of course, yes, we should remember that what President Trump said, that Russia understands the potential of the United States because we have a sub close to Russia's borders, and it doesn't need to fly 8,000 miles or 12,000 kilometers. So President Trump is signaling that actually they are in control of the situation. But what Putin is doing with all that bravado, with all that notice of new nuclear missiles, potentially nuclear missiles, it's trying to drag Trump into a negotiation without any mentioning of Ukraine, because they can. And unfortunately, we must understand that. We must realize that, yes, it is possible for Moscow and Washington to communicate on that level, on the level of strategic missiles and nuclear arsenals of both countries, because the only agreement that's left from the Soviet times, from previous Russian times prior to war in Ukraine, the only agreement that is left is the New START treaty, and it's coming to an end in February 2026. And for President Trump, nuclear weapons is an extremely important question, of course, as for any president of officially or de jure nuclear states. There we know 5 de jure nuclear states, or de facto nuclear states. Of course, we should include probably Israel and Pakistan and India, at least those 3 countries we should include, and add up to Russia, the United States, China, France, and the UK, who are officially nuclear powers. So for President Trump, this might be a real important negotiation that might actually be taking place. But as of now, we are seeing only irritation from President Trump's side. And we are only seeing that President Trump is commenting on those Burevestnik testing in, I would say, even a sarcastic manner, because he said that Putin should not be making such statements about testing of new missiles. He should put an end to a war that was supposed to last a week, but has been going on for 4 years now. That's what he should be doing, not testing missiles. So as of now, I don't see any willingness from the Trump side to actually negotiate with Russia, even though nuclear weapons and strategic weapons is, of course, a topic that is extremely important for President Trump. But he's not cracking under Putin's pressure. President Trump really is moving towards making Putin stop, at least stop at the battle lines as of now. And hopefully he will not crack under pressure. I really hope so. And I really hope that Marco Rubio, the state secretary, will help with that, even though the Kremlin is definitely doing everything they can, and hysterically doing everything they can, to drag the United States into a negotiation on the economic front with Kirill Dmitriev, and on the strategic front with those new nuclear missiles.
Alexandra, thank you so much for the conversation, for interesting and important conversation. Today we were joined by Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst and member of the European Leadership Network UK. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, insights, and until next time.
Thank you very much. Until next time.